Okay, here's a couple other ways of scattering leaf-like stuff inside of volumes and whatnot, which is going to be kind of cool. If you want to make, other kind of shaped things. So one is going to be a particle system. So I'm going to just start with a dome here, a domed shape. I'm going to right click on this and go to object properties and just tell it to display as box. That way I don't have to look at the dome. I can just look at the sort of a box shape here that gives it transparency. I'm going to hit wild guess 6 on the um, keyboard, and this opens a particle view. You may have to drag this up. Mine was crushed down at the bottom for some reason, but it's all your operators. So all of these operators can be used in the particle system. So we have to create a particle system that's going to generate particles within here. So we're going to start with an empty flow and drag out empty flow. And we're going to need to birth particles, means they actually need to be born. So we've got this event. We're going to connect the renderer down to the event. I'm not even sure we'd actually need this, to be honest with you. But that's going to give us our particle system here. I think it would actually, because we need to have this icon in the scene, which has now been generated for us. And this is the pflow source icon. Really doesn't matter where it is. I'm going to move it over just so you can see it, but it'll be created at 0, 0, 0 for you. So I've dropped this here now. So what we need to do now, we've birthed particles. They're starting to emit at frames 0 and stopping at frame 30. We want 0 and 0. We want them to start emitting and stop at 30. So spit out 200 particles all at the same time. I'm going to reduce that down for now anyways. We're going to play with that number. The display is going to give us the final display of those particles. I'm going to change it from ticks, which is going to be dots, to the geometry that we're going to generate. So great, we're birthing particles and we can't see any particles. The reason being is we're not telling it where the particles are coming from. So we need to go down and we need to find position object. Drop a position object in next, and then we can tell it what objects. Emit objects from, add, click on here, and boom, we see a bunch of particles now. We just see these ticks. We don't see any specific geometry because we haven't told it what kind of geometry it is yet. So let's go and add that. We're going to say shape, drop in a shape, and we're going to put that in here. So now they're all cubes. We're going to tell those to be, let's see, what are they supposed to be? I forget, I think special. There we go. So we're going to drop in specials, and specials are these little cards that give us these little cards like this. So that each of these little cards is just, basically 3 planes facing in all directions. We're going to make these leaves, but we need to be able to add material. So let's go and find material static and drop that in. And then I'm going to take my output of my material, which is here, and I'm going to drop it into the material none. So I'm going to instance this over to here and say instance, and I'll just close this off again. And for whatever reason, it isn't drawing because we need to go back up to our shape and say generate mapping coordinates. Turn that on. Forgot. So now that we've got these mapping coordinates, so now we can go ahead and increase or decrease the amount of particles, and under shape we can handle the size, but we also want to probably have a variation on size. So I can crank up that variation of size. And so I can adjust the size, and you can see they're kind of they're staying inside of the volume, or actually they're not, they're staying on the surface of the volume. So position object, location surface, location volume, there we go. So now they're birthing inside. So the radius of this will control the amount that are in there. Now they're all perfectly aligned with one another. So I'm going to go and take a rotation node and drop in a rotation node. And that rotation node is set to random 3D, and it's going to create this random mess of these suckers. And we just check our amount. That looks pretty good. So now we want to turn these into geometry. Okay, so we need to get this turned into geometry. So I'm going to go over to my create panel, down to compound objects. We're going to create what is it again? Mesher. I'm going to drop a mesher in the scene. Won't matter how big it is. And back to the modify panel. Pick. I'm going to pick our particles, and then I'm going to go in and say add this pflow event, and we're going to say that flow. There it is. I don't even think we may not even need it in this one. No, we do. We need it. Yeah. And for whatever reason, it creates it offset from world. I don't know why, but it just does with particles. It's kind of weird. So you can see it's way over here. It's probably going to need that material applied as well. So I'm going to go in and just assign material to selection so we can actually see them. So this now will update. So I'm going to take the measure object and set it to 0, 0, 0, and it'll be right on top. So I'm just going to slide it over a little bit so it's right beside it. So this is our final meshed object. We'll have to reset the pivot in here. So you can see it's a pile of leaves that are going on. And now we can adjust any settings in here, and it'll update the settings in the mesher object to give us what we want. So realistically, this could be anything. It could be, any kind of shape we're looking for. But in this case, we've got this hemisphere sphere, set on hemisphere, and we can set it up for as many as we're looking for. Into shape again, play with, variation of sizes, overall sizes, whatever we're looking for, and we can get this nice variation going. Once we're done, we just simply convert the mesher object down to an editable poly. It breaks the connection with the particle system. And of course, then we can just simply go ahead and align the pivot back to itself. I said align the pivot back to itself, center, center. That makes more sense. Center, pivot to center. There we go. And move it down or whatever, wherever we want. And we've got a bush. There you go. That's one way. I think personally that's the best way, but this might be a little confusing for some. I'm just going to close that off. What we might want to do is do it manually. And that manual way might be taking, for instance, a couple planes. Again, I'm just going to apply the material to it. And I'm going to take that plane, check how many segments are in it. We'll just take it down to 0, 0, so we can make this ourselves. And I'm going to go and angle snap on with A on the keyboard, 90 and 90. And I'm going to grab the original, convert it down to an editable poly, and just go ahead and attach these two. And I'm just going to make a copy of this just so that we don't lose the original. Same thing, I'm going to create a sphere again that's set to hemisphere. So it's the hemisphere has been turned up. And I'm going to take this object now. I'm going to go back to the compound objects. This time I'm going to use scatter, distribute into this object here. And we're then the amount of duplicates. And I'm going to say in volume. And we can then say base scale. I don't know how big these things should be. We've got some transform, randomness, craziness. So we're looking at rotation, 180, 180, 180. So it randomizes the rotation of them. And so now we have a bunch of them scattered inside of this space. And I'm not sure how many do we have. Duplicates 57, looks pretty good. Convert that down to an editable poly. 5 on the keyboard to get into sub-object element and delete the original element that's in there. And you can see that there's the original sphere. So same sort of idea. It produces the same sort of result. I find the particle system is easier to manage and easier to control because it's just easier to see what you're doing with it. And you can fill all kinds of shapes, but you could do the same thing here. Either one will get you to the same result is what it boils down to. A whole bunch of sort of cards all mashed together. You could use this for leaves on trees or whatever else, bushes, depending on the shapes that you make. Particle systems too, you can load any kind of shape into it you want. Your particles could be characters running around, anything you really can think of. There you go.